Hi, I'm Dr. Julie Nelson, and I am a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine here at Change Integrated Health in Vancouver, BC. Today we're going to talk about Crohn's disease, IBS, and gut issues. And this is a subject very near and dear to my heart because I have had Crohn's disease. So let's start. I first became aware of the body's ability to heal itself when I was in my fourth year of university. And for anybody that's ever gone through university, by the time you get to your fourth year or the end of your master's or PhD, you're pretty well done. And in my case, I had had a life of long hours of studying, poor diet, a lot of sugar, alcohol, and a very tenuous living situation. So a lot of stress in my life. The result was at Christmas time I went home and I had some strange illness. I had like a flu, I don't know what you would call it. So just a lot of diarrhea, lethargy, just felt really sick. I did tests for mono and they came back negative, but I just wasn't feeling well and I was basically super run down. What I did though is, because we lived on a dairy farm, I actually poured myself a cup of unpasteurized milk. And we had unpasteurized milk because it's very high in cream, because the cream floats to the top, and so it's great for coffee. But it's also very high in bacteria. And so here I am in this poor, weakened, sad state, and I have a cup of milk, and it makes me super sick because unpasteurized milk has so much bacteria, and when you pasteurize it, you basically heat it to a high level to kill that bacteria. So I had unleashed a fury in my digestive system. So I head back to University of Guelph, and at 4 in the morning, I started waking up with severe stabbing abdominal pains, and this went on pretty well 5 to 7 days a week. I'd wake up at 4 a.m., I'd have severe diarrhea, I'd have night sweats, and food just irritated my stomach. Any kind of food irritated my stomach. And so in March, I went home to celebrate my mom's 50th birthday, and my parents were like, "What's happened to you?" And I'm like, I just didn't feel well. Like I was just like pale, and my hair was falling out, and I lost a ton of weight. And so went and saw the doctor in Guelph, and they basically confirmed that I had Crohn's disease, which is basically an inflammation of the small intestine in my case. And it was like the last foot of the small intestine where it meets the large intestine, the ileum. It was very diseased. And I was malnourished and basically at risk of getting super sick if there was a bug that attacked my system, because anemia had the whole thing. So what they did is they hospitalized me in Guelph, and I was on total parenteral nutrients. Was basically, it's an intravenous with high caloric, a lot of calories, and they pump you full of this calories. And so it was basically, I don't know, 3,000 or 5,000, whatever it was a day. I'm just basically like a chicken lying in bed while they just pump nutrients back into my body. So after a week of this, I put on 25 pounds, I get released, and that's really where the problem started for me. Is I was out about a week and made the mistake of having a Big Mac, a large fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Probably the food I should not have been eating for a kid who had a really bad digestive system, but I didn't know any better. And the result of that was it caused bleeding in my small intestine. So now I'm back in the hospital and I'm being scheduled for surgery because the bleeding is not stopping and I'm getting sicker and sicker. So they take out a foot of the small intestine, and that began a series of what I would call inflammation, fissures, and just blockage in the small intestine. And so what would happen would be I would eat certain foods and it would irritate the gut. I would have to stop eating until the gut settled down and resume eating again. And the problem is when you have an obstruction in the intestine, it is so incredibly painful. It's painful to the point where you need morphine to manage that pain. And so what was happening to me was I was eating the wrong kinds of food. White bread would land me in the hospital. And so at midnight I'd be pleading with an admitting nurse going, "My stomach is so sore, could you please give me morphine for the pain?" And a lot of the times I think they thought I was just a junkie or an addict looking for a hit. The reality was I was a kid who had Crohn's disease and didn't know how to manage my symptoms and didn't know the kind of diet I should be eating, what I should be doing and not doing. And so I ended up back at my GI's office saying, "Hey, this is horrible. Like I'm missing work. I'm on the couch for 2 or 3 days at a time in severe pain." My life was miserable and very unmanageable. And at that time, about a good 25 years ago, they didn't have the medications for Crohn's that they have today. And I know a lot of times people today are treated or managed with medications to stop the inflammation. In my case, I just kept triggering it over and over again. Stress, alcohol, sugary diet, and just poor lifestyle decisions. And so I went and saw my GI, and he said, you just need to exercise and build up the muscles in your stomach. And I'm like, really? That's it? If I build up my gut muscles, this will all go away? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's great. And I was like, for the first time, because at the time I was 22 years old, and had just had this vicious circle of in and out of the hospital and just like constant pain and not knowing when my gut was going to give out and where it was going to give out. And it was very debilitating. I was like, okay, I'm down. And so I went out and I bought a mountain bike. I thought, I'm just going to bike myself to health. And that didn't work. It did not work. But what was interesting, what did work, is I actually met my first husband. And meeting him settled me down. It settled me down, and for the first time, probably in my life, I felt calm. I felt calm, I felt safe, I felt secure, and my gut started to respond. And I was like, well, isn't that interesting? And my diet improved, and what I realized having Crohn's disease is I could not drink alcohol, specifically white wine, on an empty stomach. In fact, alcohol, really of any kind on an empty stomach, would irritate my gut and cause inflammation to happen. And so through a process of time, trial and error, I came to realize that I needed to eat foods in smaller amounts, so moderation. I needed to eat foods that would not irritate my gut. So really spicy foods, or alcohol, or overeating, those things all irritated my gut when I was in a flare-up. And over time, as I calmed down, my gut calmed down. And I think, people get Crohn's disease for different reasons. I know in my case, the Crohn's was triggered from childhood trauma. I had just led a life of not feeling safe, of being in constant flight mode. And when you're in constant flight mode, it does inhibit your digestion. In fact, your digestion process stops until the danger passes. And the problem is I lived too much in that state of being. And then when you added alcohol and partying and long hours and high sugary diet, poor diet, a lack of sleep, it creates the perfect storm. And the other thing that's interesting in Chinese medicine is that overthinking weakens the spleen, weakens the digestive system as well. And so when I was in my last year of university, obviously I'd spent 4 years of pretty intense studying, and that weakened my gut. And what was also further interesting is the GI at the time that I was working with in Guelph noted that there was a higher incidence of Crohn's disease in females in their last year of university. For whatever reason, we were just kind of succumbing to, basically gut inflammation, right? So what was the takeaway from this? So fast forward, I go to Chinese medicine school, and I'm fascinated because I wanted to know how they would treat Crohn's, like how did they recognize it, just having grown up with it. And what I had noticed was it came down to diet. And in Chinese medicine, food, every type of food has an energetic property attached to it. And so foods that are hot would be foods like red meats, so beef and lamb. They're considered hot foods. So when you eat them, when you bake them or broil them or barbecue them, they put a lot of heat in the body. But they're also very high in iron, and they're great for blood building. Foods that are cool are your vegetables, things like watercress, cucumber, watermelon, your leaf lettuces. Those are all cooling type foods. And bitter foods would be things like arugula. And bitter foods drain heat from the body. So what I came to realize is what I should have been eating when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease were foods that would nourish the spleen and stomach. And those foods are your orange root vegetables, your yam, your carrot, your squash. Those types of foods to nourish the spleen because they're easy to digest and they have a certain amount of sweetness to them. So you want to bake them. You want to bake those foods or make them into soups so that if you are a person suffering from irritable bowel syndrome or digestive disorders, you want foods that nourish the spleen. Soups are very easy to absorb because they're already broken down and you heat them up. Foods that will really irritate the gut are foods that are out of the fridge. They're cold, raw, crunchy foods like salads and vegetables. And I know those are the foods that we've been told are good for us. And they are good for us if we have a strong, healthy digestive system. If we have a weak system, like I did when I had Crohn's disease, where it was irritated and it was bleeding and it was swollen, you can't digest and absorb cold raw foods. Smoothies just make everything that much worse because it causes bloating, and it causes the stomach has to warm it up before it can break it down. And in my case, it did not have the what we call digestive qi to break those foods down. And so what I learned from studying this medicine is that I should have been having warm cooked foods and foods like rice. Rice in Chinese medicine is bland, but it's also very nourishing. And so those are the foods that don't tend to irritate the gut. Things that do irritate the gut are sugar, greasy, spicy, and alcohol. Those are foods that I should have been avoiding, and I wasn't. And then the other thing is also to get to a place where I was calm and felt safe, because once I felt safe, then the digestive process could regulate itself and do the repair and maintenance that it does on a regular basis. And what was interesting is probably a year or two once I had graduated, this mom reached out to me and said, hey, my son's in the hospital. He's been in there for 5 days with gut issues. He's not getting better, and his tests are all coming back normal. Could you take a look at him? So I went to the hospital and met with him, and just kind of got to know more of his story in terms of what landed him in the hospital. And he was basically in his first year of university. He'd been playing rugby at the varsity level. He had just come off a big rugby tour through Europe. With his teammates, they had been playing hard and drinking hard and celebrating. So after 4 or 5 days of heavy drinking, he got off the plane and basically went to the hospital. His gut was in a mess. He could not absorb food. He had severe gut pain, diarrhea, the whole thing. And to further that, he was a first-year student, so he'd been a lot of stress. He'd been playing high-level sports, so body was worn down. And his dad, his parents were divorced. His dad had super high expectations of him. So he had a lot of pressure to perform and to succeed. And all of those things will take out your digestive system. Make no mistake about that. And so here he is lying in the hospital, and just poor diet. They're giving him Jell-O and all kinds of stuff, and he can't eat it. He has no appetite for it. So we discussed basically the diet. Again, soup. When you are having a flare-up, you want carrot ginger soup. That ginger is a magical property for healing when it comes to the gut. And if you start to find that you're getting a stomach ache, if you cut a couple slices of raw ginger and add hot water, like a mug of hot water, just make yourself a tea with it, it will settle down the gut. It's amazing, and it will heal the inflammation, the pain that you're experiencing. And so this poor guy, we talked about his diet, and we got him regulated, and they were going to work with him with a sports psychologist to further help him manage the demand and stress load. So the two components that I want to stress here are you've got to feel safe, and you've really got to look at your diet and your lifestyle and make those changes. And your body will tell you what you can and cannot handle when you're having a flare-up. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is because I was 22 when I had Crohn's, and I've managed to live the last 30 years without any flare-ups, no medications, no issues, no hospitalizations, nothing. Why? Because my body is in the parasympathetic system. I can rest and digest and absorb food easily. I am able to eat the foods now that I couldn't eat when I had a flare-up. So now I can handle orange juice. Orange juice is very acidic, so if you have a flare-up, avoid the acid foods. They will just make it that much worse for you. Milk is also something that I could not, and still to this day cannot tolerate. Nuts are really hard, but I can tolerate nuts now. And so when you're going through this, you really want to look at your diet and go to a very bland, easy diet. Things like mashed potatoes, rice, squash. Watch your legumes, because they may be too hard to digest. So watch your beans and chickpeas. Those might be too much for the stomach. And create a food diary and just keep track of the things and what you're doing when you're having flare-ups. So are you under a lot of stress? Are there relationship issues? Is there fear and uncertainty in your world right now? Are there money issues? Because those things you hold in the gut. And as a result of that, you inhibit your digestion. And so if you have any questions about this, because it's a topic very near and dear to my heart, I welcome your feedback. I think the one thing, though, that's interesting is I don't know that I would do acupuncture when you're having a flare-up. I don't. Just because that area is just so irritated as it is, and there's a lot of bloating. Now, I do a lot of acupuncture for bloating and for digestion and to improve digestion. But when you're in an actual acute flare-up, the best thing to do is just to get off food and just small sips of water, ginger tea if you can handle it, and wait for the flare-up to settle down so that you're absorbing food and you're having regular bowel movements. Once that happens, then it's easier to seek treatment, come in for acupuncture, acupuncture healing touch, and just start to slowly build your energy back up again. But the best thing to do during an acute flare-up is get off the food and wait till you can settle down, and then gradually foods that are very easy to absorb, like the soups that we talked about, carrot, ginger, and then breathing, meditation exercises, and build yourself back up again that way. Because I do know when you're experiencing a flare-up, it's a very depressing place to be, because you know you're going to be in pain for the next 2 to 3 days, or however long it takes for that flare-up to settle down, and that's a hard place to be. So I totally get when that happens to people. That can cause depression and that sense of fear that it's never going to pass. So if you have questions and you would like more information on this, and information on diet and what to eat and what not to eat, and how to build the body and strengthen the body, please reach out to me, Julie Nelson, She Integrated Health. And if you would like more information on things like this, hit the subscribe button, and I'm happy to send some more information your way.